Hey everyone, welcome to my lecture. If you are in my Tuesday class, I am probably sitting right behind you, looking at you, watching you, making sure you are following along. If you are in my Wednesday class, I am home observing Yom Kippur, which is why I recorded this lecture. So I hope you enjoy and I hope you're able to go through this lecture, the activities at your own pace, that you're able to pause the video when you're confused, when you need to rewind, when you need more time to sketch note, and of course, when you stop to talk to your partner or the person closest to you. I apologize about my voice. It is clear that I do not have one. So I'm going to make this full screen and I'm going to start and I'm going to hide my lovely face. Okay, give me 1 minute. See if I can do both. Stop that webcam. There we go. Okay, so today we're going to pick up where we left off last week with regards to race and race as a social construct. So the first thing I would like you to do is to pause the video, maybe put on a timer on Google for 3 to 4 minutes to answer these questions. What is race? How is it a social construct? And then answering the question, while race isn't real, the effects of race are. One place you can find the answers to these questions are in the vocab section of your notebook. Another place you could find the answer to these questions is in the reading you started last week from the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. So take a few minutes to do those. If you want, you could check in with the person next to you to make sure that you are both on the right page. And again, the purpose of the do now is to jog your memory from what we did last time. Okay, moving on to the next slide. The agenda for today is we're going to take some notes, you're going to watch some videos, you're going to give yourself a 5-minute break. I'm going to intro the census. Your homework is to complete this video, this lecture, if you did not finish it in class. If you did finish it, awesome. Don't forget that the annotations and the answers to the questions on homework number 7, how to be an anti-racist, is due next class. So Thursday for my odd periods and Friday for my even periods. And again, ask your friends if you're not sure. It was the reading was on a white packet and the questions and how to annotate were on a blue sheet. I will be checking both of those on Thursday, Friday. Alrighty, here we go. I don't know why this is moving so slowly through the slides. Give me one more sec. There we go. All right, so if you have not done so already, please open this exact slideshow in my Canvas. It's called Race and Ethnicity, or What is White Supremacy in Modules. You're going to want to pause my recording from time to time to watch the videos that are embedded into this slideshow. So the essential questions for this unit, there are a lot of them. The ones we're going to focus on today are: what is the difference between race, ethnicity, and nationality? And how is race a social construct? We will go into these other ideas over the next 2 weeks, including the last question in the race and ethnicity category. So for your sketch notes, if you want to label them today, what is the difference between race, ethnicity, and nationality? That would be awesome. So take a moment to do that. Thank you. All right, this can go in the main section of your notebook. So that is our objective for the day. The difference, being able to define the difference between race, ethnicity, and nationality. So what is the difference between the two? Well, they are both socially constructed, meaning society created the idea of both race and ethnicity. There's no biological or scientific backing to either of them. Race, though, excuse me, is based on physical traits that society thinks are important. Physical features that are observable to society: facial structure, eyes, eye color, hair. Ethnicity is different. It is based on cultural traits that society thinks are important. So, for an example, A race is Asian, but an ethnicity is Japanese. I'm going to give you some other examples of what ethnicity looks like on just the next slide. Japanese, for example, is an ethnicity because people of Japanese descent share a language, they potentially share traditions, maybe a religion, any other cultural events or traditions. Those are all examples of ethnicity. So we could take a look at this slide here. It's a shared history, shared culture. We can think about food, language, values, how you identify, traditions, and geography, where you're from. Japan is a specific country with a distinct language, distinct traditions, distinct food, and values. And you can see, I really like this umbrella as it gives you a bunch of different examples of how culture works. And we're going to do a bit of a deep dive on Latino as an ethnicity and not a race, but that's going to come in just a few slides. So, again, ethnicity is based on culture, different history, traditions, identities, whereas race, as a reminder, is based on physical traits. Ethnic groups are specific. I have listed a few here: German, Irish, Filipino, Puerto Rican, Mexican, Chicano, Chicanx, Latinx, Hispanic, Tongan. There are many, many more. These are just a few. African American can be both a race and ethnicity, as it is specific to Black people who come from the continent of Africa. There are Black people that come from all over the world. This is specific to those who trace descendants back to Africa and identify with that culture. Okay, so we have ethnicity and we have race, and then we have nationality. Nationality is based on the law and where you have citizenship. So, for example, if you are a citizen of Vietnam, you are Vietnamese. Vietnamese, of course, can also be an ethnicity, so it gets confusing. If you are the citizen of the US, you are American. If you have a citizenship of both places, you have two nationalities. So, for example, I only have citizenship in the United States, so I am an American. I have friends that have citizenship in the United States and in the countries that they were born in. So they have dual citizenship, two nationalities. You can see the word nationality has the word nation in it. We're going to look specifically now at Latino, Latina, and Latinx. So let's look a little bit at Latin America. You can take a look at this map, and in a few minutes, you can pause this video, open up the slideshow, and click on where it says Fun Interactive Map. So Latin America makes up 20 sovereign states, states that control themselves and several territories. Latin America makes up 30% of Earth's total land surface area, and the major languages are Portuguese and Spanish. This is because many of the countries, most of them, in fact, gained their independence from the Spanish and Portuguese colonizers in the early 1800s. Latin America expands from Mexico, which is still considered North America, all the way down to the tip of Argentina and Chile. But you can see that Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, these are all parts, these different islands here, all part of Latin America. The Barbados, Antigua, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different terminology that gets thrown around when referring to or talking about people who speak Spanish as a language or who identify as being Spanish versus Latino versus Hispanic. Let me break it down for you. Spanish. Spanish are people that come from Spain. So somebody came from Mexico, came from Cuba, came from Argentina. They are not Spanish. They are Argentinian. They are Mexican. If they come from the Spanish speaking Caribbean islands, they are not Spanish. The only people that are Spanish are people that come from Spain. Hispanic. This refers to people who descend or come from Spanish speaking countries. So Brazilians and Haitians, for example, wouldn't be considered Hispanic. Why not? Brazil was colonized by the Portuguese. They do not Spanish is not the predominant language there. Haitians were colonized by the French, and they speak a variety of languages there, Spanish not really being one of them. Many people from Spanish speaking countries do not like the word Hispanic because it directly connects to their colonizers and oppressors, the Spanish. So let me say that again. Many people who come from Latin American countries, excuse me, that were colonized by the Spanish, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, Uruguay, Chile, so on and so forth, do not like the terminology Hispanic as it connects to their colonizers, the Spanish. And many people have complicated relationships with the colonization of their country, as colonization could often lead to the loss of language, culture, identity, and religion. And therefore, instead of being referred to as Hispanic, people from these countries may like to be referred to as Latino or Latina, or maybe just Mexican or Uruguayan or Nicaraguan, so on and so forth. Latino or Latina is the phrase that I most commonly use to refer to people who come from all countries in Latin America, including countries that were not colonized by the Portuguese or the French, like Brazil and Haiti. Latinx. Latinx is similar to Latino, but the X erases gender, as Latino and Latina refers to the gender binary of both men and women. The X takes away the binary and is inclusive of all people, men, women, excuse me, agender, gender nonconforming, genderqueer, and gender fluid. Other things that might be important to note are, um, like I said earlier, many people in Latin America just would refer to themselves as the country that they were born in, the country that their family is from, whatever. There is no right or wrong way to do this. Something else that some people may not know is that Latin America has one of the largest African descended populations outside of Africa. Um, People that are trace their ancestry back to Africa and live in Latin America can be referred to or refer to themselves as Afro Latinos. And there are millions of Afro Latinos throughout Latin America, specifically in Brazil, Colombia, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Venezuela, Peru, and the Dominican Republic. So I want you to take a moment and pause my screencast, move over to the slideshow, and take a look at some examples of the sketch notes from my last loop. Again, the language might be a little bit different as I change my slideshows from year to year, but as you can see, these students did a great job with really big letters, different sections here, different colors, and boxing out key ideas like this idea that racism is real. So take a few minutes to do that, pause this video, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, we saw this already, so I'm going to move on. Okay, the next section will be completed in pairs. You and your partner should watch all 3 videos on race and ethnicity together. You want to make sure the videos are full screen. If it's too complicated to watch together, take your own headphones, watch them individually, and then answer the questions together. If you and your partner are not finished sketchnoting at the same time, please wait for them. Just add on to your sketch notes. And yeah, all the questions for the next 3 videos will be answered in your notebooks, and I will check those when I check the rest of the sketch notes. So for these videos, you're going to watch, discuss, then write. I have the 4 questions here. These are the same 4 questions you will see for all 3 videos. I've also given you some keywords at the bottom. So again, you want to pause the video, and I'll see you after you've watched these 3 videos with your partners. Being aware. Okay. So now you have gone through the beginning of the slideshow. We've learned about the differences between race, ethnicity, nationality. You've watched 3 videos with your partners. You've discussed them, and you've answered the questions in your notebook. You deserve a break. Please take 5 minutes to stretch your legs and walk away from the computer. I'll see you back here after 5 minutes. So pretend I'm here or pretend I'm leading this full class. Take a moment to stretch, to practice some breathing, to refocus for the second part of the lecture. Now, underneath where you took the last notes, or going back to the notes that we took last week, you can do this. I would prefer this to be in the main section, but if you already started it in the vocab section, no problem. I want you to write in big letters, how is race a social construct? So our second objective will be, I will be able to identify what is the census and how its racial categories have changed over time. So what is the census? Many of you might have heard about it before, or you've talked about it with your families. I'm going to use it as an example to show you the different ways that race has become, how race has always been a social construct throughout history. Census, the word census means count. The United States Constitution requires a count of every person living in the US. This allows the government to decide how many representatives in the House of Representatives each state should get. So, for example, states with larger amounts of people, like California, have many more representatives in the House of Representatives in Congress than Rhode Island or Vermont, for example, which have much smaller populations. But it does way more than just a simple count. Since it was first created in 1790, we have used it to gather statistics on race. So, what do they all have to do together? Okay, like what's the connection? Well, I'm going to tell you. The US Census has largely determined the definition for race that was used and is still used today in the US. So, what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look. I think I kind of already went through this, but I'll just reiterate one more time that it talks about how money is spent throughout the country. If it is seen that your particular area or your region is in need of greater funds, let's say for education or for other areas, the government can then reallocate money to your specific region. It also conducts survey about how people live. So it does much more than just count. All right, so let's start at the beginning. 1790. The 1790 census had 5 categories. So when people would come around to ask you your race, you had to identify as one of these 5 categories. Okay. What if you didn't fit into any of those categories? What if you were an indentured servant who was white, who had come over from Europe, that had to work for somebody else for a certain amount of time? Different than being an enslaved person, is you got paid, but you weren't necessarily quote unquote free. What if you were a person that was not white or was not enslaved and likely black? Where would you identify? I don't know. 1850. Now, the 5 categories were divided by, and I put this in quotations, color: white, black, mulatto, which is a phrase that we do not use anymore, which is a person with mixed race, black and white ancestry, black slaves, and mulatto slaves. Mulatto meant, in this instance, that you were no longer enslaved, whereas here, black and mulatto meant you were enslaved. Again, you can see here, this is an example of what the census looked like. And if you did not identify as any of these 5 categories, what were you supposed to do? Let's look at Chinese immigration, for example. So we see in 1850 through 1880, Chinese immigration spiked. Therefore, the census, responding to the wave of Chinese immigration, decided to, in the next census, include the category of Chinese people on the census. However, of course, there was a catch. And as you can see, the population of Chinese people drastically declined even after they put the racial group of Chinese on the census. Are you confused? I'm confused. Let's back up for a second. First of all, Miss DS just said that Chinese would be considered an ethnicity. That's true. But what the census did was they said, okay, we have a lot of people in our country now from Chinese descent. Therefore, we're going to create a category to include Chinese people on the census. What about the Chinese people that were in the United States before the 1890 census? What happened to them? Again, confusion is the name of the game here. This is all to prove to you that race is not real and has been used to make up different categories of people to serve the interests of those in charge. Now, again, let's go back to this chart and we see that Chinese, the amount of Chinese people in the country strongly declined. That is because in 1882, the United States government passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. While this is not necessarily connected to our overall discussion of the census and race as a social construct, it does show you that the United States, over the course of its history, has banned and prohibited immigration from various countries around the world purely on the basis of race, which is why when Chinese people were excluded from coming to the United States in 1882, the number of Chinese people significantly dropped. Even though, on a complete side note, the Chinese people that came to the United States during that rush came and did the labor for the railroads and other industries that were incredibly hard, that were incredibly grueling, that helped build this country. And as you can see from this picture, and we're going to look more at pictures like this from next week, the way in which Chinese people in this picture and a white American male on the right hand side are portrayed, are depicted, and how spreading these messages influences how people think of others. So, again, back to the 1890 census, we're now into the 8 categories. But did you notice there is no more slave category? Why? Because slavery, for legal purposes, and I put that in quotes because if you're familiar with segregation and the discrimination that existed after slavery ended, it was still around. But slavery as an institution legally ended 35 years earlier, nope, 25 years earlier in 1865. So that category was then removed. It was no longer a quote unquote race. And you can see we now have 8 other races. Indian in this instance is American Indian or Native American. At this point, it was not people who came from the country of India. And as you can see, we have Chinese and Japanese on there as races, which today we would now consider ethnicities. 1930, we're now at 10 categories. Now it's getting even more confusing. Now they're referring to Black people using different language. Indian is referring to Native American. Hindu, which is a religion, was referring to all people that came from anywhere near India, regardless of the religion they practiced. So they potentially could have been Muslim, they could have been Sikh. In this 1930 census, they were to identify as Hindu. And again, Hindu is not a race, it is a religion. Mexican, you can see, is on the 1930 census, as is Filipino and Korean. And again, we understand these today to be ethnicities, but at that point, they were considered race. All right, fast forward ahead. We have 19 categories in 1990. You can see all the different categories here. So if I were looking at this, like, great, look, it's way more inclusive. This is awesome. Not so fast. Not so fast. I hope this isn't covering it, but I'm going to move this down just a little bit just in case you can't see, but maybe you could see it on my slideshow. So if you identified as numbers 1 through 15, you would check one of these boxes. However, if you identified as Mexican, Mexican American, Chicano, Puerto Rican, Cuban, or other, Spanish or Hispanic, you had to choose one of these races in number 4. You had to choose one of these races in number 4 because these categories 16 through 19 were not considered a race. They had to choose their race separately. Now, this is confusing for a lot of reasons, one of which is that people from Latin America don't all look the same. Some people have lighter skin and would be classified as white. Some people have darker skin and might classify themselves as brown or mixed or biracial. Or the terminology that might be used in Latin America would be mestizo, which also means mixed. But again, that is not an option in the number 4 category. Okay. Moving right along. I want you to do me a favor, pause this, take a moment to be like, what did Miss GS just say? And I want you to discuss this prompt with your partner or whoever's closest to you. At this point, you could just do whoever's closest. The 1930 census refers to Mexican as a race. The 1990 census refers to Mexican, Mexican American, Chicano, Puerto Rican, Cuban, other Spanish, Hispanic, etc. as an ethnicity. People who identified as one of those groups then were asked to choose a race. How do you explain this change? Feel free to use the sentence frames that I have here. So again, I would pause the video, open up this slide. It's slide number 35. So you can discuss this with the person nearest to you who's at the same point. It's really important you talk this stuff out because if you don't talk it out, it's more and more confusing. In fact, preparing for this lecture, I spoke with my colleagues as to the best way I could try to capture something that is super confusing. So I hope you all do the same. Lastly, we are at the 2020 census. So what has changed in 20 years? Okay, once again, Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin are not considered a race. But now, members of these categories are asked to select a race in question 9. So you can see they have an option to choose some other race here. What's also interesting is that for me, if I were to check the box white, which I am, I would also have to then put the different places I was from, which is actually more my ethnicity than anything else. I'm glad I'm not responsible for conducting the census. Key takeaways, things I want you to think about as we move into next class where we're actually going to do a deeper dive into the census. People experience race in different ways. There is a close connection between race and how people are treated in society and by the government. As you can see, depending upon what the government's interests go in quotations were at the time, often depended on how they chose to put people in different racial categories. If it benefited them in 1930 to create a special racial category for Mexicans, then they did it. If it benefited them in 1945 to take it away, they did it then too. What does that mean if you are a person that identifies in those racial groups? Thinking about what if you're a person like myself whose race has stayed the same and constant my whole life, and when I go to check boxes on surveys, it's an easy, yep, I'm not Hispanic, I am white, move on. For other people, this is much more of a challenging and confusing and complicated process. This is why it's important to understand that no matter who you are, people experience race in different ways. Even people of the same race experience race differently. And again, racial identity is real and racism is real, even if the idea of race is not. So I want you to look through the sketch note example from the last loop on the next slide. It's pretty short. And then I want you to try something new in yours. If you've never done big letters, do that. If you've never done containers to symbolize big ideas, try that. If you've never tried drawing little icons, try that. Just try one new thing this last time around. So here's one example of census, the sketch notes from census from the last loop, but you have the notes, the sketch note examples from earlier in the slideshow that you can look at as well. So I am finished. So if you finish early, here's what you're going to do. Number 1, complete your sketch notes. Number 2, complete the homework that's due next class. Number 3, read your independent reading book from English. If you've done all 3 of those, you can have a silent study hall. I hope everything that this all makes sense. If this is Tuesday, ask me questions because I'm sitting right behind you. If this is Wednesday, send me an email. I will be home observing the holiday, but will definitely be able to respond to your emails if you have any questions, or write them down and ask them to me on Thursday and Friday. To my 4th and 6th period, who I haven't seen in a little bit, I miss you all, and I am looking forward to seeing you on Friday. All right, team. I'll see you later. Bye bye.